when you're new to a market, go to that market, meet the players, meet the brokers. Don't just call them because they have a million people calling them. Hey, I'm from California. I'm from New York, and I'm looking for multifamily in Memphis or whatever. And they're like, yeah, you and 100 other guys, and I always ask the brokers, like, how many people actually come here and meet you? He's like, not that many, honestly.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB & Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 282. My guest today believes that holding forever is the best way to become financially free. Jonathan Barr grew up in a real estate family and started investing after the Great Recession. He's done higher-end single-family flips, ground-up developments, and multifamily repositions with his brother through their company, JB2 Investments. Today, we're also going to talk about fix and flipping versus multifamily and Jonathan's investment strategy that has generated over $22 million in profits with an average yearly return of 38%. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So what was it that made you decide you're going to follow along your family's footsteps and stay in real estate yourself?
Honestly, I didn't really want to get into the business because I saw, my family were so busy that they didn't have a lot of time for other things because the flip business is a tough business in that way. But I graduated college in 2008, the Great Recession, and couldn't find a job. And my mom was like, come work for us. I reluctantly went because who wants to work for their parents? And so we began doing, and the family business has always been flips since basically I was born. And so we went to the foreclosure auctions, we bought short sales, REOs, and we were buying 7 to 8 homes a month at one point, with me orchestrating to people at the auctions, to observers, and making sure that was working. And we had a whole process and software created to be able to manage that and control that. And then from there, the flips started drying up. So we still kept doing the flips, but we also got into some developments, ground up developments, townhouse developments. We also at the time were holding some of our flips as cash flow properties. So we had a small portfolio that I manage and lease myself. So I've kind of been in the trenches. And then last year, at the beginning of January, my brother and I left that business and transitioned into investing in multifamily after buying a building in Kansas City in November and then closing on our first larger multifamily 5 months ago in Oklahoma City. And we're looking to do 3-4 more of those a year and keep that going.
Here's a question for you. So you were fix and flipping in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. Were you always running into those HGTV people who you were up against as competition?
I never ran into those people. They did try to get us on the show at one point, but it just didn't make sense. And we were so busy, we honestly didn't have time for it. I guess it could have been some good free marketing, but we didn't really need it. So we didn't really move forward with it.
So you've been through a lot of different types of strategies. And it seems like you've been fully invested in those along the way. Why did you keep pivoting and changing your strategy?
With the flips, we always did those flips ongoing, even when we were doing other things. It was more like an opportunity for some cheap land around the corner from our office came up, and we were a little bit slow because the flips had kind of dried up a little bit. So we just saw another opportunity business there. Though building and buying existing assets is a whole nother animal, especially in LA, where developing and building is pretty challenging. And then could back up a little bit. 2012, 11 or so, I bought a few duplexes that I sold in the last year to 1031 into these deals in the Midwest. And I just saw the power in holding long term for cash flow and what ultimately how that's the better option. So I think being able to have done a few things really solidified for me what the best strategy really is.
Let's rag for a couple minutes on fix and flipping.
Sure.
What's wrong with that strategy for you?
I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. It just, you in LA, it would be easy to make a 6-figure profit on a deal, which is incredible, right? But then you look at the taxes you pay, especially if it's less than a year, you're going to pay taxes on ordinary income. So you're going to pay the highest tax bracket for those profits. And then you're just stuck with capital that you have to put into the next deal because you don't want to be stuck with a bunch of cash that is diminishing in value quickly, especially in the kind of economy we have right now. And then you could keep on doing flips, but then you have nothing to show for it. When it comes to a longer term cash flow, 10 years from now, I could have $50,000 a month in cash flow and I can go on vacation. I could do this. It just gives you more freedom and flexibility. It's a long grind, but at the end of the day, you're gonna be better off when the fix and flips is more of a job. You got to keep on doing them. You still got to find, at least a deal a month to keep on going. In our business, we got to find 2-3 deals a month just to kind of pay for overhead. So it's like, you're always trying to catch up. You're always trying to find the next deal.
Did you make a profit on all of your fix and flips? And what was your average return?
Yes, not every deal worked out the way it should have. And there was a couple deals that we lost money on, of course, but over 400 deals, a few deals that you lose money on isn't bad. But yeah, our average return was 38%. I think on average profit was like 60 to 70,000 a deal. And so we made about $22 million in a 10-year span after paying for all overhead, salaries, office expense, lease, all that kind of stuff.
However, like you said, the tax liability on that 22 million was at the highest tax rate.
Yeah, some of it wasn't taxed at the highest tax rate because we're doing more gut jobs, bigger jobs. Some of these projects did take longer than a year. So some of it probably
so you were able to
taxed.
Get the long-term capital gains as opposed
exactly
to
on some of it, but a majority of it, I would say 80% of it was probably less than a year.
What was the worst horror story you had while doing the fix and flips?
When you go to the foreclosure auctions, you don't get title insurance. And at times you have second deeds that can go to sale. And if you get bad information, you could technically buy a second and still have to pay a first. So we did have a situation like that where we bought the second. And when we sold it, we did have to pay the first. So there was a significant loss on that deal. But if you average it out over 400 deals, it's just a blimp in the whole grand scheme of things. But it was a tough situation, but we got through it and because of that, we put a lot of systems so that could never happen again. Checklists, things like we can't bid on a property unless we have all these things checked out. No ifs, ands, or buts. I'd rather pass on a deal than not have something checked off on our checklist for due diligence.
Were you aware it was a second when you bought it, or were you just?
We got bad information. So basically, the title company sends us information, and I confirm. And after that point, we just started confirming different places, getting them on the phone and just like triple, quadruple checking everything. But they basically sent us bad information that we acted on.
So you also got into development as well. It sounds like you developed some townhomes. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
So like I said, the flips started drying up a bit and prices were getting to a point where it started to at first it didn't make sense to build because prices just wouldn't make up for the cost of building in LA. But it started getting to a point where it did make sense. And so the land that we bought was around the corner from our office. I saw a sign on a fence, called the guy that owned and lived in an apartment close by, walked in with like a one-page contract, signed it, and made the deal happen. We bought the land for $250,000, and it was easily worth $1 million at the time. So we knew no matter what, we can't fail there, basically. And so we hired an architect that was experienced with the product type that we're trying to put there, and went through the whole process. It's actually still under construction, but it took us about 5-6 years to get in the ground in that project because it was a subdivision entitlement project in a historical area. So we had to go through all these different committees and neighborhood councils and historical council and everything, and talk to all the neighbors. And it's a monumental task. That's all I could say about that.
That's a long time to sit on that land for 5 years before. Have you actually broken ground at this point?
Yeah, it's almost done at this point.
How many townhomes are we talking? And
12.
What are some of the numbers on that?
12. So we bought it for $250,000. I think all in and maybe $500,000 a door it's going to end up being with the cost of purchase and entitlements. But it's valued probably closer to 10 million after everything's done. 10 million plus, probably 11 million. So it's a good deal for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're going to sell off those townhomes, or are you going to?
Those are going to be held as a rental at this point, just because so much has gone into it. We just feel like let's hold on to it in a really good area of LA. It's going to appreciate. It's going to cash flow based on what we're into it.
Why didn't you keep going down that road, the development road?
There's too many variables. The city has too much control. Even doing like utilities is complicated. It takes like a year to get LADWP to like draw a plan and get it all implemented. So there's just so many risk factors that, to me, the risk return isn't enough for what you have to go through.
Then you started down the multifamily road,
Yep.
and especially investing out of state. What got you thinking about doing that and leaving behind the fix and flipping and the development?
I was in Kansas City probably 4 years ago. My wife has family there. I was bored. It was Christmas time. Just on LoopNet looking at deals, just because that's what you do when you're bored when you're a real estate person. And even though there's no deals on LoopNet, but I was still kind of browsing. And I started doing some numbers. I was like, oh, this is going to make sense. Started talking to brokers, looking at some properties. I had a few duplexes that I was looking at, that my return on my equity there was 3-4%, and I knew I could do better. So I sold one of those duplexes, 1031 all those funds into a 14 unit in Kansas City. And I've owned that for over a year now, and it's been performing better than expected. And it's doing really well. And I'm already getting crazy offers for it, even a year later, for that building.
Well, okay. Let's dig into that just a little bit. So you had a duplex in Los Angeles.
Yep.
And you ran the math, and you said, you know what, I'm only making 3.5% on the cash flow that you were receiving?
Yeah, the cash flow based on the actual equity, not the money I put into it.
Oh, the actual so you looked at the appreciation, the true value of the property. The
true value, and looked at the equity that was there. Because that's the thing, you could own something for 20 years and you put, 25,000 into it, but now you have $1 million, for example, in the property. And what's your return on that? And can that equity be better used somewhere else? And can you get a better return on that actual equity? So
in essence, you had trapped equity in this duplex.
Yeah, I had $500,000 trapped in that. That was making me 3%. And I moved it over to Kansas City, and now I'm making 10+% on that same equity.
What you did there is very sophisticated, because you used a 1031 exchange to basically sell your duplex. And through the 1031 exchange process, you didn't have to pay any taxes on that profit, because you rolled them all over into the 14 unit in Kansas City.
Yep. Yes.
Okay. And how would you say your cash flow improved between the duplex and that 14 unit?
It more than tripled from that. I was making probably about 1,200, 1,400 a month, and now I'm making 5,000 a month on that 14 unit.
Wow, big change.
Yeah. And then I did a cost seg right away to do accelerated depreciation. And in that first year, offset all my income from 2019 as well.
The cost segregation report basically breaks down all the components for tax purposes so that you can depreciate them on a faster schedule rather than depreciating them over 27 years, 29 years. You can speed that up. And what's interesting is because you 1031'd into a new property, you were able to start your depreciation all over again on this new property.
You do bring some of your basis over from the original property, but you still get a new basis because of the new purchase is a higher purchase than your previous one. So you're still getting, so I was still half of the money I put into it, I was able to offset with depreciation losses to offset any other ordinary income because I'm a real estate professional.
Definitely check with your CPA when you do these things. Don't just listen to me or you, but you said something else about being a real estate professional. So talk about that for tax purposes. What does that mean to be a real estate professional?
It basically means that you put 700 hours plus into real estate. And there's a few other stipulations. You could look it up and talk to your CPA and all that. But so for example, if you have passive losses, but you're not a real estate professional, you could still offset other passive losses and move that forward for 20 years. So let's say you don't use all those passive losses in that year, you still could use it for the next 20 years. And obviously, like you said, check with your CPA, and everyone's situation is different. So
definitely another tax strategy to look into if you are fully invested in your real estate and actively managing it to some degree.
Yep.
So the 14 unit in Kansas City, how did you go about putting systems and people in place to manage that for you?
I actually bought this one turnkey, and there was already a manager in place and it was fully leased. So I just kept the manager in place. They send me monthly reports that I review. If I have any questions, we either jump on a call or have emails. And then if there's any sort of large expenditures that need to happen, they do need to get approval from me. So I basically just review monthly reports. I get maybe on a call with them once a quarter. Because it's a turnkey property and it is a little bit smaller, there haven't been any major issues. I haven't had anything over $1,000 happen yet on the property over a year.
And so you've owned it just over a year. You're already getting offers. Is it for a lot more than what you paid for it?
Like 20% more than what I paid for it.
So what are you going to do?
I'm going to hold on to it. My prepay is really high too, because I did a yield maintenance loan. And for your listeners who don't know what that is, yield maintenance is basically they charge you based on how long is left on the loan, and they have like a certain calculation, but it ends up being pretty ridiculous that it a lot of times doesn't make sense unless someone's taking over that loan for you. So one lesson I learned from that is if you're going to have a prepay, just do a step down. And what that means is maybe it starts with like 3 points to get out of the loan, then it goes down to 2, then 1, and 1 again, and then eventually 0. So that if you do get out in 3 years, like maybe you're still paying a prepay, but it's only 1 point, which is a lot easier to deal with than 5 points or something much higher.
And at 1 point or 5 points, that's percentage points of the remaining balance basically that you'd be paying.
Yeah.
Because when a lender makes a loan like this, they're anticipating that long-term interest income from that loan. And if you sell it too soon, well, they're going to charge you a prepayment penalty to capture a good chunk of that back.
Yep.
It's important to be aware of what that's going to be. What kind of loan was it?
It was a CMBS loan, which is it's basically like an agency loan. It's pretty similar.
I'd assume it's assumable, but
it is.
Maybe it's, it can also be expensive to assume it as well.
It's only 1% to assume it, but the lender doesn't have any reason to really allow someone to, I mean, they have to let someone assume it, but they're not going to be motivated to go through the process. And I hear they drag their feet a lot when people try to assume it.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB & Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. You got the 14 unit in Kansas City. It sounds like you also picked up at least one other multifamily out of state. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
We bought a 72 unit in Oklahoma City. And so we were looking for that 50 plus unit deal, couldn't find it in Kansas City. A lot of California, New York people there pushing prices up, especially in that 50 plus range. So we just opened up the radius a few hundred miles and Oklahoma City, landed there, and the fundamentals were there. We went down there. All the redevelopment in downtown is amazing. They have parks, breweries, the NBA arena. I was really impressed with what we saw there. And so my brother reached out to a property manager that knew about the deal that we ended up using for property management, and then separately connected with the broker who didn't want to deal with us because she didn't know who we were, but she had done a deal with our property manager who ended up vouching for us. And so she was, based on him giving us validity, she was willing to work with us. We made the deal happen, and it's been performing really well. We've actually beating our projections by 67% on that deal currently.
That's great. Why are you beating your projections like that, especially during a pandemic?
So we're doing slightly better on income. We're doing slightly better on expenses. The big reason why we're doing a lot better is because we originally forecasted an interest rate of 3.3, but we ended up getting a promotional rate from the bank at 2.5% on the mortgage. So that 0.8% is it's a little over $2,000 a month, which equates to quite a big difference. So that was the main reason.
Wow, that is great. Is that fixed and for how long?
Fixed for 5 years.
What kind of loan is that?
Bank loan. Bank of the West is the bank. They're a national bank, but they're based out of California.
Explain that promotional rate. Why would they give you a promotional rate?
Part of it was that we had to keep 25% of the loan in deposits with the bank, which basically was our CapEx and some other miscellaneous money that we kept there, because the bank has to have a certain amount of deposits in the bank to be able to continue to lend. So that's how they do that promotion once a year to kind of incentivize people to keep deposits with them so they can keep lending.
That's really good. So you were able to do that and get a lower interest rate.
Yeah, incredible interest rate.
What are some of the complications now that you have the 72 unit and the 14 unit? What are some of the complications of managing remotely, or at least managing your manager remotely?
Now with Zoom and the technology that we have, it's quite easy. I would say the only downside is if, like, for example, we're working on this, another upside to that project was there used to be a pool, and we're converting the old pool room and sauna room into a studio unit. And so we're allowing our manager to manage that that process. So that's been a little bit challenging, not being able to walk it throughout the process easily without flying out there, obviously. So I'd say that might be the downside, that you can't go there. There could be an issue and you can't get there within hours. If it's a big issue, we could fly there in a few hours. We can get there in a day if we need to. I'd say that's the main downside, but it's rare when we really have to be on the ground.
How did you take down that 72 unit? Did you sell another property and do a 1031, or did you raise money from investors?
So I sold the first property I ever bought that I lived in. So I actually did a partial 1031 because my wife and I lived in one unit. So we had the $500K primary residence deduction that we utilized. And then the other half, because of the rentable duplex in the back, I had a 1031, which is pretty, I didn't know before that you could do a partial exchange like that. So I exchanged the exchange funds I put into the deal. My brother sold the property and he put funds into the deal, and then we raised the rest from a couple friends. But we did try to raise funds from more people, but I think we were in the height of COVID. A lot of the people that we knew, it was a new thing that we're doing. So they kind of wanted to see how we did on this first one before they invested. So my recommendation to any listeners out there trying to raise money, start as soon as you go outside of your network immediately. Because just because you might have a couple wealthy friends or uncles or whatever, doesn't mean they're actually going to pull the trigger and perform. So you need to start branching out to people as soon as you can.
Where are you now? Are you looking for more properties? Have you found anything that you're going to be closing on soon?
We were in escrow on one deal, a 69 unit deal in Oklahoma City. Fortunately, we did have to cancel that deal because the owner lied about the size of the units by 25% and would not give us a discount. And so we said, well, we had to stick our ground and be and cancel it. And we did have probably about 10 to 15,000 in losses between an appraisal that we had to pay for, an inspection, and attorney's fees during the transaction. But we are diligently talking to brokers. We actually hired a third party to help us talk to owners directly. And I'm also analyzing data for other areas just to see if there's some overlooked place in the country that's doing well that no one's really looking at. So I'm digging in through that as well.
What does it mean that he lied about the size of the units by 25%? What did he say, and how did you find out that he was wrong?
When I was going through my due diligence documents and I was on the assessor website and I was looking at their measurements and their drawings of all the buildings, it just wasn't calculating based on what the owner had given me for the size of the units and what that totaled and what the assessor had. And when I questioned him about it, he's like, I guess went back. I don't know. He didn't purposefully lie, but it's still a lie's a lie. And I think he went back to his records. He was the original builder from the 80s. I think he went back to his records, realized he was wrong, and corrected it. And we went from having an average of 800 square feet units to 600 square feet units, which is a pretty significant difference. And we just couldn't push the rents the way we thought. And our numbers weren't going to work unless we got a nice little discount.
Let's talk about holding forever, because you're one of your core beliefs now is that holding forever is the key way to become financially free. Talk about that. Why do you feel that way? And give us some examples.
For forever, I mean more like 27 and a half years when we run out of depreciation, but 27 and a half years is pretty much forever in my boat. And we're also not against, since we're buying 70s product, eventually those systems will be at a point where we may need a 1031 into a better asset. So I'm not against 1031 into maybe a better asset, but the concept of forever is, why sell a property that you know well? If you sell, you're going to have, first of all, you're going to have to pay a recapture tax on any depreciation you've taken. Pay significant taxes on those gains. And then what are you going to do with that money anyway? You're not going to let it sit there. So you need to put it in something new. When instead you could hold the property that you know already, do a refinance, and get probably about the same amount of proceeds you would get from a sale anyway, that you could move into another property, and you could just keep on doing that. And then every 5, 7, 8 years, you do another refinance, take some money out, and keep that going. You may need to keep some of that refinance funds to continue to improve the property, because you might remodel that same property in a 20-year span, like 2 to 3 times. But the idea is, instead of doing 50 longer term flips, you could do, maybe 20 buy and hold longer term, and then build up your cash flow to a point where you could live a pretty good life off that more permanent hold basis.
So your goal is not to own the properties free and clear. Your goal is to add enough value that you can refinance, pull that money out, and then deploy it somewhere else into a different investment opportunity.
Yes. And with conservative debt, you don't want to take out so much money that it's barely breaking even. You still want you want to leave it there cash flowing, and then move that money somewhere else.
Smart leverage is what you're talking
smart,
about.
Conservative leverage.
Well, Jonathan, what else can you advise our listeners who are, either they're fix and flippers looking to get into buy and hold, developers who are tearing their hair out, like I'm sure you have been over the past 5 years, or just a multifamily and apartment investors who are looking for opportunities? I mean, you seem to have found 2 good ones just in the past year. What kind of advice do you have for them?
Underwrite a ton of deals, because that's just what it takes. It's not easy. Like, by no means what we're doing is easy, but making sure to follow up with brokers, be on their radar, call them. Don't just email or text them or whatever. Like, actually get them on the phone, because you want to have that human interaction, because they have people calling them, emailing them all day, and you need to set yourself apart. And also, when you're new to a market, go to that market, meet the players, meet the brokers. Don't just call them because they have a million people calling them. Hey, I'm from California. I'm from New York. I'm from wherever, and I'm looking for multifamily in Memphis or whatever. And they're like, yeah, you and 100 other guys. So go fly there. And, and I always ask the brokers, like, how many people actually come here and meet you? It's like, not that many, honestly. Like, a lot of people just shoot and don't actually come out there and are serious. So just being serious and being able also to know what you're looking for too, because brokers are going to ask you, okay, what cap rates are you looking for? What's your investment strategy? They need to know what you're looking for. And if you don't even know what you're looking for, how are they going to help you find something?
How would people get a hold of you?
I'm actually pretty active on Twitter. So you could look me up at JB2 Investments. You could also just go to my website, jb2investments.com. You could email me at jb2 Investments. And we also, a lot of the tax stuff that we discuss on this podcast, I have an ebook on our website, and it's just JB2 Investments /lower.
What's the name of the ebook?
The Tax Stack Strategy.
The Tax Stack Strategy.
Yeah. Good, it's a little tongue twister, but it works.
Well, Jonathan, thanks for taking us through kind of the arc of your real estate career so far. The fix and flipping that you were doing in Los Angeles with your family, the development project, the townhomes that you were working on and still working on, and then just your pivot into buy and hold multifamily out of state. Really interesting. And it sounds like you've had a lot of success. Congratulations on that. And thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully it's of value for your listeners.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.